that he makes this beneficial for us and beneficial for the audience on the day that we meet him, inshallah. So it's the start of 2021. We had a couple of topics that we wanted to get into at the start of the year, but alhamdulillah, Allah has willed that the year starts off with some new experiences for most Americans, if not all Americans. And on Wednesday this week in the capital, there was some never before seen turmoil at the time of a transition, and a process that normally tends to take a few moments ended up being national news for a while. And it's the first time that I think many of us in the country have seen something like this. And so, it seems, I just wanted to kind of open up the floor and see if either of our shuyukh had any advice or any comments that they would like to make to those in our audience who, have just lived through this thing and seen it. And Allahu Alam, how the situation continues to change as the days pass. And so given the new nature of this reality that we have and the unknown sort of expectations that we might have moving forward, perhaps it's a good time for some reminders of what we discussed a few episodes back about political turmoil and political strife and so on. So I'll leave the floor. I'll start it off there and just see if either one of our shuyukh has anything to add. Shaykh Yasir, I think we should start with you on this one.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Barakallahu feekum. It's good to be back. Subhanallah, as I was, as we continue to watch the events unfold, I couldn't help myself but think that, how fragile this dunya is, and things, we grow up and we develop and we kind of exist in a space where we conceive of things as being so insurmountable, or things being so so constant. But then, the fragility of circumstances and time and people and just the nature of this world is that there's taqallubat, things shift and change quite drastically. And, to witness what we witness on Wednesday, it shows you some of that. And it's important from a spiritual, I think it's important from a spiritual theological perspective to internalize kind of the nature of this dunya and how it can shift and change at a moment's notice. And, as they say, dawamul hali min al muhal, the constancy in states is impossible. And so, that was one, I think, really kind of big reflection that I had. The other reflection that I had was that, you see how destructive the human nafs can be. Imam al-Ghazali, he talks about the nafs al-shaytaniyya wa nafs al-subu'iyya wa nafs al-bahimiyya. And you can see all three of those nufus, kind of prevalent. The shaytani nafs is the nafs that just can't get over itself. It tantasir li nafsiha, always, kind of fighting for itself. And regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how much harm or destruction or pain occurs, the shaitani nafs is the nafs that doesn't mind to see that everything burn down around it, as long as it is able to advocate for itself. And that's a very ugly nafs. The dogged nafs is the nafs that likes to see harm, likes to see others in pain. And there's in this like type of very stark binary between two sides. There's this. I hope and pray that some of the reconciliation that played out in the media was true, was real, was genuine, because you saw some semblance of a reconciliation. But Allahu Alam, as these things unfold in the nature of our political discourse, there's unfortunately a lot of opportunism. There's a lot of it's a covetousness of wealth and power, and that's constantly the angle that's being negotiated. And that's kind of that bahimi nafs. It's whatever I can indulge in, whatever is opportune in the moment to have this stance or take that stance, or and that's another kind of the fickleness of the human self, is the ability, if you have specific interests, then you'll seek them, you'll desire them. um the last point, kind of dovetailing off of this one, um, we really have to think, I think, as individuals, as countrymen and women, if you will, that do we really have morals, values, and principles that we advocate for? Are we, as a country, um, are we pursuing morals and values and ideals and principles that really take primacy over all things? Or does everything kind of just result or devolve into a battle of wills between parties and people and interests? And unfortunately, we see that kind of at the highest level of our political discourse in this country. But we see that then trickling down into all sorts of spaces, and we see that very prevalent in the Muslim community as well. That type of um, nafsani discourse, but also just becomes a battle of wills, my opinion versus your opinion, etc. And and I think Muslimin in particular, we have to, as members of this country, as citizens in this country, we have to internalize the most beautiful of prophetic ideals, and we have to really channel the being of the Prophet ﷺ, who was sent as rahmatan lil alameen, mercy to all the worlds, so that we then kind of begin to bring about that the transformational reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about, which is Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. We are part of the citizenry. We're millions of people in this country, and there are plenty of wonderful Americans who want good. They want to see meaningful things happen in this country. They want stability, and you and I, inshallah ta'ala, because this is predominantly a Muslim audience that's listening, we have to induce a type of spiritual change within, for the wellness of our country and for the wellness of the world. And it really does start with us assessing our nufus. We may look at someone like Trump, and kind of have certain very
That's all.
particular aggressive critiques of who he is and how he is, and the people around him, the people who endorsed him, the people that he insulted and mocked, and then they suddenly come to his defense and all this kind of stuff. But do we perhaps have a semblance of that within ourselves as well? And that he just reflects a general nafsani trend that exists not only in this country but beyond. So those are some high level thoughts. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Yasir, for those beautiful reflections. Allah barik feek. I guess in line with one of the things you mentioned, for me, especially with entering the new year and everything that happened in 2020, and then seeing this happen in the beginning of 2021, is just a reminder of, the significance of how Allah Azza wa Jal can really change our dynamic. How things can, بين عشية وضحاها يغير الله من حال إلى حال. Between a day, between a night and its day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change from one state to another. And there's another verse that says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And as such, we change the conditions of people with the passage of days, that Allah Azza wa Jal raises some and lowers others, and lowers others and then raises some. That dynamic of khafidatun rafi'ah in the description of the day of judgment plays out in this dunya as well. And there's another verse in the Quran which describes the transition of power, and sometimes how that can happen in a manner that isn't necessarily very smooth and very willingly done. قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء. And the reflection on this verse here is in the word تنزع. قل اللهم مالك الملك, say, oh Allah, King of Kings, you give kingship to whomever you will, and you do naza', or you strip it from whomever you will. The reflection that comes to mind in that regard is, how um, detrimental it is when the transfer of power happens in a way that isn't smooth, isn't easy. That detrimental reality plays out in the lives of people. Correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, but as far as I read, four people lost their lives yesterday. I know that one of them directly lost their life as a result of what happened in the capital, and three others, as far as I read, there wasn't direct detail of how they exactly lost their life. But nonetheless, in the past years, in our generation, we've seen devastating realities play out in countries where they lost that sense of society, the sense of the social fabric crumbled, and we never want to see that ever manifest in the reality and the lives of people, because it just leads to total destruction. And of course, that's just a reflection. Of course, inshallah, we never get there, and that never is our reality. But it just came to mind, especially with the things that happened in our Muslim countries, and in our recent past, happened before our eyes. What happens when those nufus, as you said, Shaykh Yasir, are allowed to just dominate with their pure nafsani uh, traits, their nafsani wills and desires, and when it becomes a battle of wills, you know, and everything else is lost, I think it devastates society and it devastates people. So that's something that I think every conscious human being should have in their mind. This thing, if anything, it magnifies the need for society. It shows that if this blessing that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us, the development of the society around us, is completely lost due to our ill behavior and our bad character that we've allowed to permeate, then this is our responsibility to bear. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from such devastating realities. Allahumma ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. Barakallah fikum, Shaykhi. I will also just, I'll add one thought that come to me since the events began to unfold on Wednesday. The blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, I think a part of what you guys talked about was this sense of people taking things for granted. All right, we become so comfortable with things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in our lives, individually or as a group, and we just assume that it's become who we are, and so it's always going to be that way. But we've actively seen now over the last several years, and maybe even more than a decade, we've actively seen us as a people, as a country, shift certain behaviors that may have been normal in the past to a new normal now, and a lot of values that used to be almost seen as sacred have kind of been thrown to the wayside. And there's always been this sense from the general American politic that we just are America, like we are this shining beacon, we are this whatever positive thing they want to put on it. And the truth is, maybe there is a time and there was a time and so on where that was the case or is the case, but it doesn't happen just out of nowhere. It requires a commitment to some of the things both Shaykh Yasir and Shaykh Osamah mentioned. It requires a commitment to character. It requires a commitment to values, and it requires you to keep working on it. Right? This stuff doesn't just come out of nowhere. Right? Allah sometimes blesses people with some blessings on just from His will, but in general, the Sunnah of Allah is you got to put in the work. You have to put in the effort. You have to be committed to something for you to actually see its fruits. I think what happened this week is yet another wake-up call among many that I think Allah has been giving us as a country, that if you don't get your act right, as Shaykh Yasir mentioned, personally and then as groups and as a whole society, some of these blessings can be lost. You're not just you're not blessed in and of yourself. Like you're not protected from the faults of humanity. No matter how long it seems like America's been protected from some of these things.
As both of you are speaking, I'm reminded by the dua of Sayyidina Ibrahim, and he made a very explicit dua about the lands. Where he said, "رب اجعل هذا البلد آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات." And then, oh Allah, make this land safe and give its dwellers from the fruits and the blessings. And then also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Quraysh, فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. Let them then worship the Lord of this house that gave them food when they were hungry, and who gave them safety and security from fear. And so these particular blessings of safety and wellness and access to sustenance, the basic like staple foods and foodstuffs that enable, these are tremendous blessings that are instantiated in the Quranic discourse. In the Abul Anbiya, Sayyiduna Ibrahim, he makes this dua, give people safety and security and basic access to basic foodstuffs, so that, as Sheikh Osamah was indicating, that's where there's a lot of tranquility, there's a lot of wellness, where people really thrive in society. And then, as Ustadh Zaied is noting, this is not something that can be taken for granted, because I think, especially those of us who've lived in the West, there is a certain type of safety and security that we've been generally blessed with in general. I'm not saying that America is a walk in the park per se for everyone and anyone. There's plenty of difficulty that certain segments of this population experience, but for the most part, compared to fearing that there's a bomb that's going to drop in my backyard, that happens in many countries, or I can just be kind of woefully and willfully taken from my home through some like Gestapo police or whatever the case is. I mean, for the most part, that's not a general American reality. So that there is a sense of safety and security, and there's also a general sense of access to basic water. Once again, not this is the case everywhere in America. There's people who don't have access to clean water, but for the most part, I'm referring to. And these are things that we can't take for granted, because truly, when they are stripped and they're taken away, and these are things that are taken away, because Allah in Surah Quraysh, it's أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم. This is something that Allah gives. He feeds and He gives safety and security. So we just can't assume that this is something that's going to always exist. And we, as a country, we very often talk about how our civil servants are out there protecting our freedoms, right? And Allah protects the freedoms. Individuals, they do their part, but Allah protects, because in our country right now, if there's any sense of disarray, it's coming from within. It's not coming from without. This is not a reality that's being impressed upon us from the outside in. No, this is something that these insurrections, or this very kind of fractured nature that we're seeing, and the conspiratorial nature of our discourse, and then the charged nature. I mean, I saw a lady yesterday, the other night on Wednesday, who was saying, what are you doing here? Well, I'm here for the revolution. I'm here to take our country back. It's like, what are you talking about, right? But that kind of, hysterical disposition, we've seen other countries that have gone down very hysterical kind of conspiratorial, aggressive, absolute mindsets, because it's and I'll close with this. It's the nature of fitna, and it's something that we don't really appreciate. Fitna is something that, as the Prophet ﷺ says, كَقِطْعِ اللَّيْلِ الْمُظْلِمِ. يصير الحليم فيه حيران. It's like when a fitna happens, it's no longer a sensible thing. It's no longer a rational thing. It becomes something that's just, can be very dark, right? And the forbearant, thoughtful person becomes dazed and confused, right? And so we have to na'udhu billahi min al-fitan, ma dhahara minha wa ma batan. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all sorts of fitan, that which is evident and that which is hidden. And that's why I would say another real critical spiritual disposition that we should maintain on top of everything that we've been talking about is we have to proactively protect ourselves from fitan and protect our country from fitan. And the way we do that is, for example, by following the guidance, for example, of Surah Al-Kahf, and reading Surah Al-Kahf every Friday. I mean, don't minimalize that. Surah Al-Kahf is replete with guidance of the fundamental fitan that come about. People come, why fitan come about, what are the precursors to fitan. And Surah Al-Kahf represents, the those things. And then also it's also a source of protection. So when you read it, you recite it, you read the mu'awadat every day, you maintain your adhkar. And inshallah, hopefully when we talk a little bit about moving forward into 2021, maybe we can talk about these particular practices as essential as we're thinking about, these fitan that just come, and they really do debilitate, people and societies. And may Allah, nas'alullah al-afiyah. We ask Allah for wellness and for protection. And we ask
Yeah.
that, some of us may be listening and say, oh, come on, Shaykh, this is far-fetched. Listen, as Shaykh Osamah said, it's an ilahi reality. Allah can strip and take and shift and alter, and nothing should ever be taken for granted. Wallahu ta'ala.
Allah يجزيك الخير يا مولانا. Just to spell one thing out, sorry, Ustadh Zaied, for move on to the next subject. That from what was said, I hope anyone listening, gathered that these devastating realities that play out in societies don't happen. Uh, they usually don't happen very swiftly. Usually, the fabric of society is torn over generations in many different regards. And I think anyone who has closely examined or closely lived in a reality where, great social and political strife occurred can realize that. I personally say from, our experience in Egypt throughout our years studying there, that there was just so much to reflect on in terms of the years preceding all that unfolded in the Egyptian revolution and thereafter. The groundwork was already laid for a lot of the incidents that manifested afterwards in terms of the social dynamics, the economic dynamics, the political corruption. All of those things did not happen just as soon as 25 يناير, January 25th came. That's not when it happened. It happened generations before, and the condition of society with its various aspects of corruption just poured out in the years after that. And I think that's true with a lot of the hadith, that when we examine fitan, that a lot of those hadith address certain spiritual aspects that are detrimental to society as a whole. That's where it starts. It really starts with the nafs. It starts inside. And when that condition inside is corrupted, and that becomes the state of society, and then with that internal corruption, the realities that move society are addressed. That's where these things happen, over time. And I think that's a way to contextualize that hadith. When the Prophet ﷺ speaks about the intishar al-fahisha and the spread of nudity, and how that plays into the ruin of society. It's through that spiritual lens that one sees it happening over a period of time, and that goes for many other things that the hadith address. Wallahu alam.
Barakallah feekum, Shaykh. I do want to, before we wrap up this section and move to the, one of the more general questions we wanted to discuss today. We've always talked on this podcast or on this program about being thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all states and in all times. And I do just want to end off on that note. I do think we should be thankful as Americans that we still have enough of a political situation or a political system that's intact, and we still have enough, even though it seems like some of the threads have come apart, we still have enough sort of social cohesion that, alhamdulillah, what happened this week doesn't seem like it's going to have an immediate massive impact or change. And so alhamdulillah for that. I think everything that we've been discussing is more about the step that was taken, that if we don't correct, can have a bigger impact down the road. But I think it's important for us as Americans to always be thankful for what we do still have. And it's very evident, that there were systems and processes in the country that, protected this country from falling into far more disarray. And alhamdulillah for that. Alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved that so far for this country and for its citizens. And inshallah, Allah guides us as a country to live up to that blessing and to correct, the mistakes that we've seen happen over the last, several years. And before I move on to the next question, I want to see if either of you had anything left that you wanted to say about this topic before I kind of shift gears.
I do want to say one last thought just off of that particular point that you're making on shukr. And perhaps this is a good segue into the idea of like looking forward to 2021. We have to, I think, realize that in the spirit of shukr, in the spirit of not taking things for granted, we have to protect and preserve things. And in general, that is a human, that's a human duty, right? It's a responsibility that we have as khulafa al ard, as people who are meant to safeguard and represent and caretake. You have to actually be proactive. If you have a good thing, you have to protect it, you have to preserve it, you have to grow it. And that's from the reality of shukr. The reality of shukr and the essence of shukr is shukru, yakunu min jins shay. You have something. To be thankful is not just to utter utterances, but is to actually take care of it, tend to it, give from it, right? And so, sometimes when we're thinking about political occurrences, and especially things that unnerve us, we tend to enter into a mindset of like, wishful thinking. Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, we seem okay, inshallah, everything's going to be khair, right? Of course, everything's going to be khair billahi wa ma'allah. However, what does that mean in terms of my proactive disposition? And I think, as we're thinking, as we're moving into 2021 and we're starting off this year, we have to think about how am I supposed to be proactively? Because as Shaykh Osamah was indicating, there are things that play out in society that come from a type of imbalance and a type of dhulm, a wronging, and a lack of adl, a lack of justice, that bring about realities that are deeply unfortunate. If you think about the social stratification in terms of just economic wellness and well-being, the truly the billionaires are becoming exceedingly wealthy, and those who are not are not. They're losing jobs, losing businesses. So there's economic strife that's playing out. There's still a healthy dosage of serious imbalance and lack of justice in terms of how certain segments of the American population are treated and dealt with by the citizenry in general, by the government, by the institutions, etc. So I mean, as Muslims and as Americans, we should not just assume that correctives are going to happen. There is a proactive disposition that we as Muslimin have to embody. And as challenges and and difficulties play out, we have to become from the people of fi'lul khair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands wa fa'alul khair, wa fa'alul khair, do good. Ya ayyuhal muzammil, ya ayyuhal mudaththir, qum, right? That kind of disposition. So inshallah ta'ala, I hope that helps as we're thinking forward.
Barakallah fi Shaykhi. Shaykh Osamah, any last points? No?
Mashallah, I think we covered it pretty thoroughly, and
Yeah.
just hoping for the best, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to preserve his blessings for us. Allahumma ameen.
Ameen. Ameen.